said, would you use it for anything other than seizures or neurological issues? No, you would not. I said, okay. So what you're telling me is you have not diagnosed my son as epileptic, but yet you have wrongly medicated him for a condition that you don't professionally believe he has, and you're refusing to diagnose him with that condition that you don't believe he has, correct? I said, so what that tells me is that's the very definition of malpractice. And I went, there's no time to backtrack now. You've been doing this 6 months. I said, so you can either get on board with the fact that he has epilepsy, which he does.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Infinite Abilities Podcast. I am your host, Nick Earhart, and we are here to encourage each other to find our own unique abilities. Let's go. All right, everyone. My guest today is Jason. And as a parent, he's been through a lot, and he has an amazing story to tell. So, Jason, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I am a married father of 2 kids with multiple cognitive and physical disabilities. Both of my kids were born with severe neurological delays, meaning even though they're in their teenage years, they both function about 4 to 6 years old. Both of my kids were born with epilepsy. So, for example, there's 6 different kinds of seizures. I've seen 4 of them in my house. Both of my kids were born nonverbal. Both of my kids, although they can walk assisted with me helping them, like holding them up, they cannot walk on their own. So they're essentially wheelchair bound outside of the fact that if I were to put them on the ground, they could army crawl just about as fast as I could walk anywhere. Outside of that, we are getting some genetic testing done on some other issues. However, my son was born with a rare condition called Barrett syndrome. It's also known as prune belly. That condition, and let's see if I can make it as simplistic as possible. It's a rare condition that's 1 in 40,000 births when it happens. Right now, they don't know the official start or cause of it. They know that it's related to kidney issues. So, for example, my son was, because of his Barrett syndrome, he was born with 1 kidney. That 1 kidney did sustain some damage in utero before he was born, meaning fluid was backing up into it for some reason. On top of that, he had an abnormally large bladder that needed to be given a catheter when he was younger every 4 hours.
Wow.
The main issue of Barrett syndrome is he was born without any abdominal muscle. So these people that go into workout to get the 6-pack abs or all the muscle right there, he didn't have any of it. In fact, I could lay him on the floor and I could literally touch his large intestine and his small intestine from the outside. I could touch all of his organs. Like the only thing that was protecting his organs from the outside world was his skin and the fascia that held the skin together. On top of that, in the Barrett syndrome, he had normal lungs, but he had a diminished lung capacity, meaning whereas you and I, when we get a pneumonia or a bronchitis, we've got kind of that base of those muscles that we can press against to get the force to cough just that crud up. He never had that. So what we learned on very early was when he would get a pneumonia or bronchitis, if we didn't catch it fast enough, I would then have to rush him up to the hospital. They would do testing on him, and then he would ultimately be admitted into the hospital anywhere from 6 to 10 to 12 days trying to recover from this. And so from the kidney issue all the way through the lung issues, that is all Barrett syndrome. None of the other issues that he was born with has any relation to it. They were just separate to that.
Okay.
So in the first 2 to 3 years of my marriage with my wife, We had two kids with multiple disabilities, one rare condition. And what we're finding out now is that my daughter and my son, if he were still around, may have had a second rare condition. And with it being a rare condition, not only are we case number one for the geneticist, we are case number one, period, like worldwide.
Wow.
So that's kind of been our life for the last about 17 to 18 years.
Wow. That must be very hard on you and your family.
In the beginning, it was very difficult just because we were a young couple. We just started having a family. As far as we knew, up until about the week 20 appointment, which is that appointment that like a mother finds out the sex of a child, up until that point, we had no reason to believe there were any issues in either of my kids, period. And so at least from that point through about the first 5 or 6 years of my son's life, it was tough because we were finding all these little issues were coming out. Now, after about that 6 year, I was so used to all of them that not a whole lot really surprised me from that point forward.
Yeah. So, what would be your advice to parents who are dealing with, things similar, finding out your child has, some condition, and that basically life is going to be a lot more difficult for you as a family and for your child?
Well, I tend to take a little bit different stance than maybe what the general consensus is of people that have kids with medical needs.
Okay.
Now, I want to preface it with, I love my kids to death. I wouldn't trade them for anything in the world, despite, the challenges that we've had. But this idea that when you first find out that you've got a child with medical needs, that, it's a blessing and it's all this positive stuff. The reality is for most of us, and it's nothing against my son or my daughter, but you get upset, you get mad, you get angry. This isn't the life I was supposed to have. How am I going to do this? And so I typically tell new parents in the special needs world, it's okay to be angry in the beginning. It's okay to be pissed off. It's okay to have these emotions. Give yourself some time, have those emotions, get them out. And then once you're out, it's time to, pull up your bootstraps, kind of old saying, and you've got to get to work. You're the one that's the advocate. You're the one that's got to do the research. You're the one that's got to see the doctors. And so I tend to tell people it's very natural to be, it doesn't mean that you love your child any less. It's very natural to be angry in the beginning because nobody expects any of this.
No, exactly. Nobody does. It's not something that anybody plans on, or anybody that, a lot of times, most time, you can't control it. It's out of your control. So, like you said, go ahead, get angry, but get that anger out and then get to work and figure out what you need to do as a parent to provide for your child.
Certainly.
Yep. And, as a parent, I love that you said, it's your responsibility to do the research and everything like that. And, one thing that I like to help people or help parents understand is the doctors aren't always right, so you need to take use your own judgment. You know your child better than anyone. So sometimes the doctor might say something and it might not be true. Like just for instance, the doctors told me I would never walk. Well, I started walking at age 5. And then they told me I would never drive a car. I got my license at 16. Awesome. Then they told me I couldn't get my commercial driver's license. I got my commercial driver's license at 21. So it's just like I fought through all of them. I fought and fought because I knew I could do it. And, it's important for parents to have that confidence in their child, so then they can be like, okay, you can do whatever you want, so figure out how to do it your own way if you need to.
Certainly. And the other thing I would add to it is, when you first get in to see all the, like for my kids, I had 6 different specialists that I would see every 6 months for the longest time. There's a learning curve there. And the learning curve kind of goes, you first get into these doctors and you believe every word that comes out of their mouth as if it's the gospel, so to speak. And then you start learning things, and you pick up things from other parents that have kids with similar issues, and you research online and you see things, and then you do all these things, and you start getting to where you go, well, maybe, sure, that may be a right answer for somebody, but that's not the right answer for me.
Exactly.
And so you get to a point. Now I'm far enough along in this journey where I tend to be blunt with doctors, just because I've developed that thick skin, and there are just certain things I'm not going to allow. And so you get to a point where you'll go, when the doctor says something, you go, wait, no, it's not what I want to do. That we've got to have a different option. In fact, I would tell your listeners out there, I can't tell you how many doctors I have literally fired. In fact, one of the neurologists that my son had, I'll give you a great example. When he first started having seizures, the very first one they called a freebie seizure. And what they meant by that was they don't prescribe medication for that until it becomes a pattern. And they say your child could have a seizure and it could be an anomaly and it could never happen again. But when it becomes a pattern, that's when they start looking into medication. As scary as that sounds, I understand it. I get it. I don't want my kid to be on neurological medication unless there's a need for it. And so I was okay with that. Well, my son started having all these episodes. Well, the neurologist calls them twitching episodes. And I go, okay. And for the longest time, she refused to diagnose him as epileptic. And so one day we get into her office, and on her wall behind her, there's a list of all 6 different kinds of seizures and like their characteristics of them. And so like number 3 was exactly my son. And so this doctor, I tend to notice things and pick up things maybe other people don't. And so we came into the appointment, and she goes, how are y'all? We're fine, that kind of thing. And so we get through our appointment. I said, I have a question for you. And she goes, what's that? I said, what's Keppra? She said, it's a medication to either maintain or stop seizure activity. And I said, okay. I said, would you use it for anything other than seizures or neurological issues? No, you would not. I said, okay. So what you're telling me is you have not diagnosed my son as epileptic, but yet you have wrongly medicated him for a condition that you don't professionally believe he has, and you're refusing to diagnose him with that condition that you don't believe he has, correct? I said, so what that tells me is that's the very definition of malpractice. And I went, there's no time to backtrack now. You've been doing this 6 months. I said, so you can either get on board with the fact that he has epilepsy, which he does, or I'm going to call my lawyer. We drove out of that parking lot, and before we could get out of the parking lot, the nurse for her called us and said, the doctor has decided to diagnose your son as epileptic. And I went,
really?
I said, that's all we were asking for. So...
Yeah, that's an important story, and it happens far too often. Things like that, it's just doctors are quick to give out a prescription. I feel like, and it's like I wish more would take the time to thoroughly diagnose everything, because I feel like a lot of people are on prescription drugs that don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone that's always refused, so I've never really been on anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm doing just fine, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But it's like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of drugs that people need, which is good. You know, the medical field is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm not trying to say it's not,
Oh,
but
no.
I just wish that, you know, more parents would be like you and go, you know, and fight for their children and figure out what they actually need, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is amazing,
Well,
and
thank you.
you know, you're just an incredible dad.
Thank you.
You're awesome.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So, what is something that you're working on right now?
Okay.
'Cause I know you have letters to Zachary, so I'd love to learn more about that.
Okay. So the story behind Letters to Zachary is, of my two kids, my son was my oldest. Of my two kids with their disabilities, he was the more medically fragile of the two, meaning of all of the hospital stays, he was 95% of them.
Okay.
He was all respiratory related stuff. He had a couple of major surgeries, one being a spinal fusion surgery that he had to have. So it was my son that was more medically fragile. So I won't get into a lot of detail about it, but January 28th, 2022, that morning he was just fine. He went to school, came home. We did the evening routine, put my daughter to bed. And typically what would happen is we'd put our daughter to bed and we'd keep our son up about an hour later just to give him some one-on-one time with us. Because, you know, I love my daughter, but my daughter being a girl sometimes can be intense.
Yeah.
It is the nicest way to put it. I love her to death, but sometimes So
Yeah.
we brought him into our room like we normally do, and we laid on our bed with him, and we watched some TV, got ready for bed, went to go brush his teeth with an electric toothbrush. He liked it because he had sensory issues, and that he just liked the feeling of it.
Yeah.
And my wife went to go brush his teeth, and he threw up a little bit. Didn't really surprise us. So I just looked at my wife and said, well, maybe you went a little too far back and you hit kind of the gag reflex and just something came up. Didn't think much about it, put him to bed. Well, that night he was up and down all night, which is unusual for him, which this is 2 days prior to the 28th. So I'm a stay-at-home parent at this point, and I text the teacher and go, hey, Zach's got, I think, a 24-hour bug, possibly. I said, I don't want to send him to school because he was in a self-contained classroom. And I was just like, I don't want to spread anything. Should he be contagious? I'm going to keep him home. She was great. She said, fine, you know, let me know tomorrow if you're going to keep him home again or not. Okay. So he's up and down all night. I decided, so that next day I kept him home. And I sat him in his favorite chair, and I kept telling him, I'm just like, buddy, you can take a nap, because I knew he was tired because he was up and down all night. He didn't really sleep well, that kind of stuff. I said, buddy, I'm just going to be sitting over there on the couch getting some work done on my laptop. You're not missing anything. Still refused all day. Didn't really want to drink a whole lot. And that kind of towards the end of the day started catching my attention, but it was only one day. Now, if it had gone into a second day, I'd have said something's going on because he's not wanting to drink. This is the second day of this. So that night I text his teacher again and goes, hey, tomorrow's Friday. I said, I'm going to keep him home again. I think he's still not feeling well. I said, should he still be sick, then I'll have the weekend to recover. And she goes, okay, fine. We'll see you on Monday. Put him to bed that night, the same time as his sister. He immediately got quiet. Okay. We just figured he was exhausted. He just crashed. Next day, got my daughter up, sent her on her way, went in my son's room. And typically when you go in my son's room, he would like bounce on his bed in excitement. when we would walk in there. Well, we did that, and he kind of rolled and looked at us and didn't really bounce, and that didn't really strike me. I just figured maybe he still just wasn't feeling well. And I went to his right side, and I noticed this dark green streak coming out of his mouth. And I went, the only thing that's dark green in your body is bile, and it's coming out of your mouth. Why is it coming out of your mouth? And this is not good. So I get him up, and he's really floppy, like he can't hold himself up. And that didn't really strike me, because I'd had that happen once or twice before when he was really sick. So I bring him out in the living room. I did all the physical medical procedure stuff. So I kind of went through my mental checklist with him. Everything seemed okay. I gave him a catheter just to be on the safe side, to make sure it wasn't his bladder was bothering him, that kind of thing. And the only thing that struck me was the fact that his midsection was rock hard, like cinder block wall rock hard. And it was never that way, never had been that way. And so I look at my wife and I go, something's not right, and I don't know what it is. And it was honestly just a hunch. I went, I'm going to take him up to the hospital on the north side of Atlanta. At that point, my gut was, well, something's not right. He's not feeling well. They'll probably admit him. We'll be here a couple of days. We'll come home in a couple of days. That was kind of his standard when he got sick. So I get him in the van. I get on the interstate, and I'm doing like 90 up there just because I don't know what's going on. I called my mother and said, hey, I'm taking Zach up to the hospital. I think I'm going to get admitted because of X, Y, and Z. I'll let you know. Okay, fine. So we get up to the hospital, and I get him out of the van, and he's very floppy, and this catches my attention. And I'm just like, something's really not right. Like he was wanting to at the time I thought it was like he was wanting to fall asleep, but the more I think about it, he was kind of fading in and out of consciousness. So I get him up there, get him up to the ER, and I skip the line to go up to the desk. And as I'm doing it, the security guard comes over to me as if to say, well, you need to get in line, kind of thing. And when he walks over to me, I go, I don't think he's breathing. I need help. And so he snaps his fingers. The nurse comes over to me. I've been in this hospital 100 times. And this is the first time we go in a full run back to the ER to a trauma room. So we get in the trauma room. I instinctively get him out of his chair. I put him on the table, and I back out of the way in hope that they'll let me stay in there because my son's nonverbal and I can tell them what's going on. And so there's another trauma room right beside it, and I back off into there. They immediately cut his clothes off to kind of start working on him. And the first thing that I noticed is they take this drill and literally drill something into his knee. I later found out it was some sort of port, to immediately get antibiotics, medication, that kind of stuff directly into his system.
Yeah.
Now the thing that I noticed is they gave him no pain medication before that. So any normal person, if you were to take a drill and drill it in your knee, you would be in excruciating pain. Yeah. And so he didn't even flinch. They immediately start CPR on him. This horde of 30 people came out of nowhere. The head ER doc comes over to me and says, how long has he been this way? Up to the minute, the best you can tell me. And I told her, and she went off and barked orders at them to tell them what they needed to do. And then she comes back over to me as they're working on him. And she goes, explain to me why you brought him up here. And so I told her the reasoning as to why I brought him up here. I said, he's got a lot of medical needs. And I said, I do have a lot of medical knowledge relating to his needs. I said, but this is something new to me. I've never experienced this before. And she goes, okay. And so she goes back and kind of barks some orders at him, kind of thing. And then right at that point, they'd been performing CPR on him for a good 15 minutes at this point. Chest compressions, blowing air into his lungs, that kind of thing. And so at that point, they get the paddles out. Now, in the old traditional sense, they're the ones, the big plastic paddles that they put the gel on and they rub them together, that kind of thing. Well, that's not it. They're kind of pads they stick to you.
Yeah.
And the box almost looks like an Xbox to describe it, kind of thing. And so they yell clear and they hit the button, and just like on a TV show, he literally raises off the table. And so because of all his respiratory issues when we were in the hospital, I'm watching the oxygen rate and his heart rate on that monitor because I know what all that means. And they shock him, and it literally goes boop and goes right back to what it's doing. And even though at that point they were still going to work on him for 30 more minutes, I knew at that point, I thought, he's not coming back. I had an instinctual, and so they worked about 30 more minutes, and then the head ER doc comes over to me and goes, well, we can shock him again, but she goes, I don't think the result's going to change. And I said, well, this is your medical wheelhouse. This is not mine. Do what you think is professionally necessary. And so they do it, and just nothing. And at that point, they pronounce him, and, you know, we go from there. I'll say for the audience, me having to call his mother at the house when she originally thought he was going up there for just a simple illness to be admitted for a couple of days, to tell her that her son was dead on a table, I will never forget that sound she made. And then I had to call my mother, his grandmother, and I'll never forget the sound she made when I told them. On a side note, my mother told me later on down the road, she goes, the one thing that caught my attention is when you called me right after Zachary had passed away, was you were eerily quiet and calm. She said that you were almost like nothing had happened. There was no inflection in your voice. There was no sadness, no sorrow, nothing. And I said, well, in that moment, I had to compartmentalize because I needed to know some answers. In fact, the care team that came in afterwards, I looked right at her and said, this is going to sound cold and callous, and I don't mean for it to be. And I pointed at my son, and I went, I will deal with this in a minute, but I need to know answers to these questions. And she goes, okay, what are your questions? And I rattled off about 10 of them, and she answered all of them and all that kind of stuff. So with that being said, this is what started Letters to Zachary. After everything had happened and going through the funeral process and then the service, and like we had our son cremated, that kind of thing, I saw a counselor, and she goes, have you ever thought about journaling? And the irony of all of that was my response was, I'll never forget it, was, you know, I don't know how good of a writer I am. I don't know if that's my thing. And so she said, well, think about it. And she said, you can go back to that idea at any point. So that idea kind of sat in my brain and kind of on my side table for about 2 or 3 months afterwards, because I was just like, I don't know if I want to do this. Well, one day I was having a moment, and I just decided to open up a Word document, and in letter form, like I wrote the date and Dear Zachary, and I just started writing my just unfiltered, expletive-laden kind of feelings about just the whole situation. And I did that several, at that point it was early on, so I literally wrote every day at that point. And I kept it to myself. I thought, well, at some point I might print them out, and if anything, I can do it to get it out. And if I need to, I can just burn them in the fireplace. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so one day I got on Facebook, and as you know, you can find groups for anything. Yeah. And I found a group that was the loss of a special needs child, which I was kind of surprised that I found. And I got to know the admin. In fact, at this point, I'm an admin with her in this group.
That's awesome.
So I got in there and I said, do you mind if I post some of my journal entries? She goes, no, we'd love for you to have it, because as many people know in these groups, typically it's 95% women. There's probably about 5% men. And of that 5%, there might be less than 0.5% that are actually somewhat active in those groups. Yeah. And she goes, we'd love to. She said, we get so few men in here, we'd love to hear what you have to say. So I did, and I almost immediately got a response. I mean, just a huge response. And I got comments like, I have never told anybody my deepest, innermost feelings about the loss of my child, and you were the first person to write something word for word exactly how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I appreciate that I can write something that resonates with you. I said, this is, inspiration from my son. And so I did that for several more times. And ultimately, it kind of evolved to where someone said, have you thought about like doing a Facebook page? And I said, well, I could do that. I said, if anything, I could kind of copy and paste and just share with friends and things of that nature. And I can try to help other people. And so that started working okay in the beginning. I had about 10 or 20 followers, that kind of thing. And then one day I thought, well, I'm going to email some of the bigger names in the grief community and see if they'll just give me pointers, to say, hey, my name is so-and-so, I'm doing this. Can you tell me things that worked for you, things that didn't work for you? Do you have any guidance depending on the direction I want to go with this? And so literally all of them were very helpful. In fact, I had one lady that she's got 1.5 million followers. I mean, just a massive following for grief, that kind of thing. And she's like, oh, sure. What would you like, help on? And so I got help with all that. And the page I have now is vastly different from when I started. And so it blew up from there. Within about that first month, I was getting like 75 to 90 followers every couple of weeks on it. And like, as of today, we're June. So the end of May, I eclipsed 1,000 followers in under 8 months.
Wow.
And so ultimately, the page Letters to Zachary was started because I wanted to have a safe place for men to be able to express their emotions. Yeah. But since then, I have opened it up to everybody. So it's a place for men to see by my example that it's okay to express your emotions and be vulnerable about it. But it's also a place for women to kind of come in and get at least a little bit of understanding of how the male mind works in grief and emotion. And, I can help them, give them kind of some tips of, well, my husband, we lost our son X number of months ago. My husband's not opening up. What do I need to do? And then I can say, well, here's some pointers I think that will work for your husband. And so that's ultimately what Letters to Zachary has become.
Well, I love that you took, a bad situation and turned it into something that's helping others. That's very important. It's the hardest thing is to lose a child, and now you're helping other parents work through the same thing. So that's just it says a lot about who you are and how good of a person you are. You put yourself out there. You were vulnerable, but because of that, now you're helping hundreds of thousands of people, which is just incredible. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
And I want to encourage anybody listening, go find Letters to Zachary if you need support right now.
Certainly. For those that want to look for it, if you look by my name on the screen, it's that's exactly how it is on Facebook. I am on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. The only difference is instead of the way it's spelled by my name, it's letters to the number 2 Zachary is what it is on all the other platforms outside of Facebook. I would probably tell you my 2 biggest ones are Facebook, which is the one I post on first, and then TikTok. If you like a little more of the video style that's 5 minutes or less, then I would say TikTok may be the one that you want to go to.
Okay, awesome. And I'll put all your links in the show notes so people can easily find you.
Okay.
So, but thank you for sharing your story, because I know that this is going to help even more people. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on. And
Yeah.
I would probably tell your listeners, for those that are getting introduced into the special needs world or even the grief world, yeah, initially it's a shock, and initially there's a lot of emotion there, but you will get through this. At least on the grief side, you want to. I said you won't move away from it. You'll move forward from it, if you will. That will always be there. But there's a wealth of people and groups, and I've learned in the special needs journey and the grief journey that I've got more out of strangers on the internet than I have with family and friends.
Yep. Exactly. I got one more question.
Okay.
So my slogan is, "Your abilities are infinite." What does that mean to you?
Wow. Your abilities are infinite. I would say, at least as it relates to my children, I would say that implies to me that there's more than one way to get to the final destination. Just because, choice A is a dead end doesn't mean you can't reverse course and go down choice B. And if choice B is not the direction you want to go, it's not like you can't make a U-turn and go to another direction. There's more than one way to get to a resolution to whatever you're dealing with. It's similar to the idea of neuroplasticity in the brain. Just because one neuron's path is blocked or cut off doesn't mean you can't learn and train your brain to go another way to accomplish the same task.
Yep.
So that's what that motto says to me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was an incredible episode. And I know it's going to help so many people. So thank you again. If you enjoyed this show, please go ahead and share it on your Instagram story and tag me in the Nick Earhart. Also, go ahead and share it anywhere else that you see fit, because the only way that I can grow this is by you guys sharing it. I don't sell anything on here. I don't have any sponsors. So let's just get it out there by word of mouth and help more people. Alright, everyone, remember, your abilities are infinite.